Hello, it's Antonio Reid with the Rising Tide. Thank you for joining us again on our latest episode. Today, I want to talk about we're in crisis, so what do we do? Ultimately, this question came to me. My major in college was political science, international relations, and comparative politics. My other major was history, phenomenology, and then Africana studies, the study of the African people in the diaspora, which is the spreading of African people around the world. I didn't realize at the time that those kind of disciplines would be precepts to understanding the totality of the crisis that we're in today. And ultimately, I wanted to ask the question then, okay, we're faced with this crisis, okay, and this is not the first time that humans have been faced with a crisis, but we're faced with it. Now, how do we govern? Because obviously we have to do something up until the end. And I want to comment, I'll do a couple of segues as we go through today's show, dealing with some themes that I've seen kind of appear as we get deeper into the trenches on this climate crisis. One of the issues that I've seen, kind of referring to my remarks, what do we do, how do we govern, is this type of what I like to actually genuinely call as or denounce as unwarranted negativity. Now, people say the things that I say are negative, okay? Letting people know that the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration is now predicting at its extreme levels 10 to 11 feet of sea level rise by the end of the century is not negative. That is, it's unfortunate. It's not good. It certainly is unpleasant to hear, but that's not negativity, and nor is it unwarranted. Those are the physical responses from the level of CO2 that we are likely to put into the atmosphere. So bad news and negativity are different things, okay? I do want to just make that 100% clear. The negativity that I see that I'm worried about is the type of negativity that disarms people. So what I've been seeing increasingly is that people will say, well, I'm going to take part in this project to a forest, a certain land space or something like that. Or someone says, oh, I'm going to be part of this task force that takes plastic out of the ocean. Or someone says, well, I'm going to work at my university and try to get emissions to net zero by a certain amount of time. And then you'll have these naysayers come in and say, well, yeah, but if you do that, temperature rise is still going to hit 3 or 4 degrees by the middle of the century and we're all dead. Boom, bada bang. At what point are we alive and that's the time that we can't do anything good? Everyone likes to ask this question, is it too late? Too late to do what? Is it too late for the abusive husband to stop beating his wife? Probably not. I don't think it's too late for that. I don't think it's too late for a Catholic priest to stop raping his altar boys. I don't think it's too late for that. I don't think it's too late for Donald Trump to stop lying. I don't think it's too late for that. I don't think it's too late for Nancy Pelosi to step down from Speaker of the House. I don't think it's too late for that. So I think there's a lot of things that it's not too late for. And because we want to have this grandiose idea about climate change, is it too late to save industrial civilization? I honestly hope so. Because if we save industrial civilization, then everything dies anyways, because there is no saving industrial consumptive civilization. There's no way we can save what you see today. And that includes large parts of the population. That includes large parts of the population. See, this is the type of mindset you need if you're serious about this idea of governing in crises. When a general is told that he's going to war, he doesn't break down and cry and get depressed like most citizens do. He realizes, okay, well, what's the plan? What's the strategy? And every single strategy, just like IPCC scenarios, include casualties. So if you're a general and you're looking to go to war, you already know that a certain amount of men are going to die. Now, you want and you hope and you plan and you got advisors on your left and your right who are trying to give you the best way forward that results in the least amount of deaths. And that's the same thing that I think about climate. So that's why, in some sense, I'm not overwhelmed by the climate crises. Is because I understand that there is no path forward that large amounts of humans don't die. That is simply now off the table. My parents and their generations in action has taken that totally off the table. That's the cards that that generation wants to leave their children. They're in ignorance, blissfully so, and now they left us with that off the table. But what is on the table is that we may be able to save something. And what I don't want, and I don't think any of us want, is feelings of unwarranted negativity getting in the way of taking action. Okay, because we still ultimately want people to be doing the right thing. And then we actually want, which is even better, to 7.6 billion people always say, Antonio, you're not having children. I'm saying, well, of course not. That's the last thing anyone needs to be doing is having children. But we have 7.6 billion people on the planet. If one of these motherfuckers doesn't figure this out, then maybe we do deserve to disappear. If we have 7.6 billion, there's more humans today than there's ever been since one time since we've been walking the earth. If one of us doesn't have the wit and the will to get this done, then we don't deserve to live. We simply don't. And having another child and waiting until they turn 30 years old to do some action on this is not only it's suicidal. We don't need more children. We have enough children. We could start by taking care of the children we do have. That we should probably move to. That's probably something that we should do. And in doing that, I think we're going to realize that a transformation of our society is going to include this idea of talking about not having children. So AOC wasn't crazy. She wasn't. In fact, that's what I would say. Anyone who's listening to me, anyone who can hear me, don't have kids. Don't have kids. This is ridiculous. There's no way, first of all, that we know that we can even give them anything like a quality of life in the next 20 years. We're unsure we're going to have a quality of life in the next 20 years. And people say, well, you know, if you don't have your kid, Antonio, then what if he could be the one person that's going to solve this and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. My son is not going to be Jesus Christ. My son is not going to be the savior of all mankind. And if he is, God damn it. You know, the odds really aren't playing in our favor if that's really what we're hoping for right now, is that, you know, some son of a gun somewhere is going to have a kid that happens to be the Messiah. That's just not going to happen. If there is a Messiah, it is us. We have to come together and start doing things. And so that's really where I want to launch this conversation, is what to do, what to be done in the phase of abrupt climate change, the collapse of industrial civilization, and significant impacts no matter what. Well, there are several pathways forward on this. I'll tell you firstly what I'm doing in my private life, because I think that's important to discuss. I often don't talk about that unless somebody asks me, hey, Antonio, are you just bitching about climate change, or are you actually doing something? Because I get that a lot actually on Facebook. People ask me questions like that. Well, there are several things that I'm doing. Obviously, one of the things that I'm doing is working with the Environmental Coffee House to get this message out, because it's important. I think it's very important that what we hear informs what we think, and what we think informs what we say, and what we say informs what we do. So indirectly, it's important for all of us to be talking about this at some capacity almost every day with anyone that we see. I know it's hard to talk about this on Facebook. You got family and friends. My grandmother's on Facebook. Everybody's on Facebook. You know, but the older generation, they didn't know what they were getting to. I was born on the internet, basically. And so I'm used to like crazy ideas being on the internet, like people saying crazy shit all the time on the internet. That's what the internet is about. It wasn't about always taking selfies and pictures of your food. Like that's like a new thing that's kind of happened on the internet. And people like to blame the millennials. I see my mom doing that. You know, that's kind of like things that generation does with the internet. People like me are surfing the internet, finding out like new cool little widgets doing this or that, downloading movies or, looking at the latest climatological models from the top, national academies of science or scientific institutions in this nation or that. I grew up in an era where when I was going to college, my professors were genuinely stunned and surprised by the things that, people who are 18, 20 years old were finding out. It's because we had access to the internet, so the internet's not been like this takeaway. And my main point here is spread the word. Talk about climate change, talk about it in these venues, and disrupt people's happy lives. Because it ultimately, just like there's unwarranted negativity, there's unwarranted positivity. And these are things that we want to actively stay away from. In fact, I want to say, not only do we want to stay away from these things, we want to go out and condemn these things. So people who are injecting unwarranted negativity into the conversation on how do we govern, how do we preserve our species at its end, those are people that we want to not give a voice to. Other people we don't want to give a voice to are people who are saying that everything's okay as long as we throw solar panels on houses and drive electric cars. Those are also people that we don't want to give the platform to, because ultimately both of these ideologies or mindsets or mentalities are extremely unuseful in dealing with a crisis. The best mindset to have is realism. It really is realism, is warranted realism. And so that's what we're kind of focusing on. And what does that look like, warranted realism? Well, for me, I'm 25 years old. I don't know how many people know that. I'm turning 26 in September. So what does that look like for me? It looks like, first of all, recognizing the state of affairs. That's the first thing you have to do, is recognize what is under attack, what are you losing, and what is at stake. Okay, so part of that is where a lot of people who are kind of washed up in this American culture say you're being negative, is when you just talk about the impacts of climate change. So for example, we've seen across the heartland of the country this year anything between 40 to 80% delays in planting our staple crops, so corn, maize, soybeans, stuff like that. And we're also seeing stuff like this happening everywhere in the world. We're seeing it happen in Europe. We're seeing it happen in Africa. We're seeing it happen in Latin America. We're seeing it happen in Australia. We're seeing it happen in Japan. We're seeing it happen in China. We're seeing it happen in Russia. So it's happening everywhere in the world. That clearly is an indicator for us, and we're going to be slow on this because we're the type of people who talk to computer screens at 8 p.m. in the evening. So we're going to be slow to respond to this, but that essentially means that the game is up, okay? This whole idea that we're just going to grow food endlessly on an industrial, agricultural, global scale, that's up. And we knew it was coming. We knew it was coming. We knew it was coming. So what now to do? Do we starve to death? Nobody sits and starves to death, okay? Nobody does that. They'll literally probably eat their children before they starve to death. But what we want to do is act before you start getting hungry, before you see that the food's disappearing off the shelves. One of the ways that I'm trying to work that into what I'm doing, and now I guess I'll get into what I'm actually doing, is that at my former college, Appalachian State University in the mountains of North Carolina, located in the city of Boone or town of Boone, we are under high-level talks right now to lower our emissions. Our university puts about 65,000 gigatons, well, I would say 65 to 70,000, megatons of emission into the atmosphere. A gigaton is a billion tons, so we don't put anything like that in the atmosphere. We put about, like I say, 65,000 to 70 metric tons of CO2 emission into the atmosphere each year. And we're a school of about 20,000 people, so that's highly significant. And doing stuff like this, by the way, is not like the individual stuff that you always hear on CNN or PBS or something like that, like, oh, don't eat meat, which is not a bad idea. Don't eat meat if you don't want to. But obviously figuring out a way to lower the emissions for an institution of 20,000 people is going to have a much bigger impact than anything you can do individually. So also, that's another thing that we want to get people in the mindset of thinking, is that really you should be doing things as a community, not as individuals. Lead as an individual. And leading as an individual isn't personally driving an electric car or personally not eating meat, because those are not really things that people see or really interact or care with. That's not really modeling good behavior. You know, people don't really see you. If you eat 90% of your dinner is at home behind closed doors, then, you know, eating non-meat is just something you're personally doing. That's not, I'm sure you could tell people, but who likes to be told that, you know, hey, I'm a non-meat eater. You know, I don't eat meat. Oh, cool for you. Okay, you're one of those guys. Okay, so that's not really, you know, if you're going to move in that direction, try to teach that to your community. Because multiplying your own efforts times 5 or times 10, that's kind of what we need to do. And here, obviously, the things that I'm doing at Appalachian State is multiplying my effort times 20,000. So we can all have impacts like this in our community, which is the good news. Now, obviously, even if we lowered our emissions down to 0 tomorrow, it would have no impact on the physicality of climate change. That's obviously true. But the hope is that this is the type of modeling of behavior we want to see, is that institutions, communities, towns, cities, states, people all together in these collective waves, not just individually, but collectively, are moving away from business as usual. So for me right now, I'm typing a 30-page assessment. I'm using my knowledge that I have. I've read through the IPCC reports, and so the assessment that I'm developing, called the Assessment on Feasibility for Appalachian State University Toward Climate Neutrality. I'm using the knowledge that I have that I built up in college writing papers. I'm using the knowledge I have as I've been outside of college, just, you know, learning about life, reading different reports. And I'm developing my own pathways, my own scenarios to net zero by the dates that have been set forth by the Appalachian Climate Collaboratives, which is the name of the advocacy group that's kind of spearheading and championing this net zero emissions. This would be huge. I mean, this would be huge. There's nothing I can do personally in my life that's going to result in the reduction of almost 70,000 tons of CO2 in the atmosphere per year. So this is one person working with a team of people having an enormous impact on the future being of the planet. And we're trying to export this model. There are 17 universities in North Carolina, public universities. We're trying to export this model to our sister schools. And so far, they seem to be on board. I mean, that's lowering the emissions for 250,000 people. And not only do we lower the emissions for 250,000 people, by our universities making smart renewable energy decisions or non-greenhouse gas emitting energy decisions, we affect the entire regional market for that energy. So we represent, you know, roughly 1/16 of the state's population. But that's huge, and it's spread out across the state pretty evenly. That's huge for that amount of purchasing power to be shifting the market. And that starts to help individuals. And so there's a give and take that we're going to start to see in this. And we're going to start to see institutions hopefully leading the way, taking the brunt of the initial cost of transitioning, but also opening that up for smaller you know, residential blocks or retail blocks and things like that. I normally don't like to talk that way because that's really market forcing, and we need a lot more than market forcing at this point. We need people to do what I'm doing. You know, this 30-page assessment I'm writing about, you know, I've learned a lot. You know, I'm studying about energy generation from nuclear power, fossil steam, small-scale renewables, gas turbines. I'm learning about the cost of energy. I'm learning about how to do like really heavy statistical modeling, and I'm using all of this to steer us in the right direction. And I'm doing it all for free. I'm not having no one's paying me to do this, and it's taking a lot of my time. I'm having fun doing it. I'm learning a lot, and it's very meaningful. This is exactly, and again, we're butting up against these ideas because capitalism and its culture has told us that humans don't do anything. They're not inspired to work unless you give them monopoly money. If you give humans monopoly money, they'll go to work every day, which is largely correct. That's how most people do things. They get monopoly money and they go to work every day. And of course, the monopoly money I'm talking about is what you call actual money, but of course, it's actually just monopoly money. But of course, humans are inspired to do things outside of being paid to do them. The only reason why you do the things you do that you're paid to do, or the main reason why you do the things that you're paid to do, is because ultimately, if you don't do those things, you won't have any monopoly money. And so you get denied healthcare, you get denied food, you get denied a lot of services, and you die. So we do these fake things that don't matter because they pay us to do it. But here are the things that we can do in our communities now that do matter. But ultimately, our culture is not going to recognize as worthy for being paid for. And that's another thing. If you're doing something and the culture is not paying you for it, and it's something like this, that is a transition away from the model, from the business as usual approach. Okay, because right now the only people who are really working on climate change are the people who are paid to do it. That's why I was so angry with one of my good friends who's an IPCC author. He authored, actually, he was a co-author in the first assessment, second assessment, third, all the way up to the fourth. And he's going to be brought back in for assessment 6. But I asked him, I said, because he keeps on saying, Antonio, I know you're blaming my generation for this, but I'm doing all that I can. I said, no, you're doing all that you're paid to do, which is a lot because, you're doing a lot more than most people on the planet, but you're doing everything that you're paid to do. You're not doing anything outside of your pay range, your pay grade. For me, I didn't go to school for climate change. I didn't go to school for science. And I'm working on this and I'm taking time out of my life, mainly because I realized that this is the only thing that's left in our lives is to deal with this crisis. And I was, ahead of the game, so to speak, on that. But so are you guys. That's why you're listening to me, because we're ahead of the game. Now that we're ahead of the game, what can we do? For me, it's getting my school to zero emissions, which is a lot harder than everybody thought, which, of course, I never get shocked by things like that because, of course, we built the school to run on fossil fuels, and the school's been growing since it's been built, and now we're trying to change all that in 10 years. Of course, that's not an easy endeavor. Of course, that's going to be wildly expensive. Of course, that's going to take a lot of energy, a lot of thought, and people are going to have to, unfortunately, because this culture doesn't know how to incentivize us to do things that are good for our bodies, our communities, and our atmosphere, it's going to have to take a lot of volunteerism, okay? And I've been on this. I graduated college in 17. I'm still working on this 19, and I'll be presenting my report in 1920. So, I'm fully immersed in this. Again, it's because I realized that there's nothing else on the table. It makes no sense for me to go and pursue a professional career and have this idea that I'm going to be living in the suburbs. We're going to have a Pliocene climate in 10 years. Like that, so that's totally off the table for anybody. That's totally off the table. And with that said, how do we survive this? Maybe it's because I watch a lot of movies like 2012 or Avengers that I always assume that at least we can come together, if not to save ourselves, to save ourselves. That I'm also good with the idea that I'm not going to make it through this. And that's not that important to me. I think what's more important is that we give the species a fighting chance. And in doing so, we have to recognize the whole scope of issues that we face, and we have to start addressing these at different levels and different capacities. And it's great. Like I say, we have 7.6 billion people who do this. We have people who work on hydroponic systems, and that's a really great thing for the people who work on hydroponic systems. What we need are people who are articulate, people who are charismatic, people who are political, who can create general knowledge in a way that they're able to vocalize this to regular people and then advocate for it. Because what we need to start doing, obviously, is the issue of food. We're not growing our food outside anymore. That's off the table. So what we have to do, we have to start growing our food inside. So that could look like one or two things, right? Well, it could look like a number of things. But in my mind, the first thing that comes to my head is some big corporate guy comes in and says, well, basically, we're going to build big Walmarts, we're going to build big warehouses out in the middle of Kansas, and that's how we're going to do it. Now, if you do it like that, I'm sure some CEO is going to make a lot of money, and people are going to starve and die and things like that. A better way to do it would be to, first of all, everybody who lives out in the suburbs should be developing their land to grow food. That just should already be an automatic thing. But also in your cities, your dense urban cities, some of those zones need to be specifically for advanced hydroponics. We're not trying to, I don't think that we can come to a state where the cities entirely feed themselves. They're self-sustained in a sense as far as growing food. But what we should be aiming to do is decrease the amount of food that they're asking from the countryside. And we have to do that. I would say 40–50% is somewhere that we need to be aiming for the time period 2030, 2035. How do you do that? Go out, join your local councils, committees, see what they're talking about. 9 times out of 10, everybody's going to be talking about bullshit. Everybody's going to be talking about things that don't matter. They're going to be talking about things that just don't make any sense in dealing with a crisis. And that's part of the derangement, is that most of the population either doesn't know that there's a crisis happening and they're ignoring it. So you're going to actually have to bring this up. You're going to have to talk about it. You're going to have to be the weird guy. You're going to have to be the odd guy out that says, hey, I don't know if you know, but the house is on fire and you're washing the dishes. And that's a really weird thing to be doing. You're going to have to be that guy. And that's going to make you a little bit unpopular. But right now, I think it's safe to be that guy. Why is it safe to be that guy? Because we're getting freaking headlines talking about the end of the world in the New York Times and the Washington Post. Jesus Christ. At that point, it's okay to talk about the idea that we're in a crisis. It wasn't okay to talk about this in 2016. I was being called a maniac in 2016 for talking about this. But now it's on the front pages of the New York Times. You can talk about this now. But those are some ideas that I just wanted to bring forth for people. Get this unwarranted negativity out of your life. The idea that someone's going to tell you to not join an organization to pull plastic from the ocean, tell the person to shut up. Why would you not want to do that? If we have any chances of surviving, the plastic crisis is arguably worse than what's happening to climate. We need people. That's what we need to be paying people to do, is pull heaps and tons and tons and tons and tons of plastic out of the ocean. We desperately need that. And then we need someone to develop some type of technology that can pull microplastics out of the ocean. I was just listening to a report on EcoShock Radio today about how there's so much microplastic in the ocean. At every single level of the ocean, doesn't matter if you're at the surface of the ocean or you're in the Mariana Trench, there's microplastic everywhere. The crabs are eating it, the phytoplankton are eating it. So half the ocean biology is biology, and half of it's plastic right now. That's extremely alarming. And of course, plastic is it's basically an alien material that's infected the oceans, affected the atmosphere, and affected the ground. So we have to clean that up. Don't discourage people from wanting to do stuff like that. If anything, discourage yourself from buying a water bottle. You're discouraging people to do all the wrong things. Because that's another issue we need people working on. We need people working on at your job. Bring it up at your next board meeting. How are we purchasing our electricity? And they're going to hate you for that. You might even lose your job because, I'm working at a job and they don't want to hear anything like that. They don't want to hear anything like, how do we spend more money on things that I normally wouldn't worry about? But we have to transfer out of this paradigm. And part of transferring out of this paradigm is using the power of the spoken word. The power of the spoken word is mentioned in the Bible, and it's also mentioned in this document, which I think everyone should read, called The Crises of Democracy, 1975. It was a report to the governments of the Trilateral Commission. And one of the things that they pointed out is that intellectuals possess a power of the spoken word, that their speech is able to mobilize and arm people intellectually for mass projects and mass movements. That's why speaking is so important. Talking to everyone you know about climate change is so important. My friends absolutely, first of all, I was shocked, and this is another thing, just talking about what we can do. I'm totally shocked at the number of my friends who bring it up to me when I see them. And a lot of times I see my friends and I'm just like, hey, I want to have a drink. And they're talking about the end of the world. I'm like, well, this is great too, but I want to talk about it right now. I want to have this drink. But I mean, this has changed their lives. And I see a lot of them are where I was, which is great, because if they're where I was and they're my friends and they're traveling along this journey, they're going to get to where I am now eventually. And that's going to be in this action-oriented stage of, okay, yeah, we're going to die, but we're always going to die. Yeah, our parents are kind of hypnotized right now, and so is most of society. But we can do things that matter. And we can do things that have impacts. And I'll be updating you guys on this. I want you guys to know what my impacts are on getting our school. Right now, Appalachian State University's Faculty Senate is taking up the resolution. So, you know, our school supposedly is the sustainability school of the South, which is in question. But we are acknowledging that there is a climate crisis at my school. Now, we're not actually going to declare an emergency, which I think is absurd, but you know, we're going to go a half step on this and say, yeah, there is a climate crisis going on and we need to respond to it. That's a huge step. That's a huge step, because you think about what schools are, is they're basically corporations. Their job is to produce, no, not iPhones, but employees. And so obviously, you know, my school, now I'm out here saying it, but Appalachian State University has its top financial associate is a financial cartel that engages in fraud, financial fraud on a large scale. Wells Fargo, you know. So schools definitely do have the profit motive in mind, and yet here our school is stepping up and saying, at least a part of us are stepping up and saying, we've got to get away from this business as usual, because first of all, it's criminal. Business as usual is criminal. And giving a microphone, a platform and a stage to criminals is probably something a university shouldn't be doing. But not only do we got to do that, is that we actually have to begin an equitable and just transition into a future that has a chance. Well, with that said, I'm going to open this up for a little discussion. I just wanted to kind of give you a positive note, let you in on some of the things that I'm doing. The last thing I'll also say, because I do want to mention these people in my life as well, is that I also have been working with, I should say, Stuart Scott at the scientist warning.org. And also his climate TV programs that he does, many of them taking place at the Conference of Parties, the COP. And you saw Dr. James Hansen on there, Paul Beckwith has been on there, Peter Wadhams has been on there. So a number of different scientists have been on there. I think even Jeff Sachs has been on there. So it's a really great programming that Stuart Scott does. I was leading his translation team of over 40 international translators, and I was corresponding with them and getting them to do a lot of the translations into over 25 different languages, so that we could broadcast this most important message. So there are plenty of things to do, people. There are plenty of things to do. What you don't want to do, again, I'm going to leave off on this before we enter this discussion, is that you don't want to have unwarranted negativity in your life, and you don't want unwarranted optimism in your life. Both are paralyzing, and they will put you in a position of complacency, disarm you, and render us into a state of inaction. So with that said, let's open up the comments, see what's going on, see what people are saying about all this. So Kim Johnson Ciento, going to be a very bad year for crops. That's true. It's not going to be a bad year for crops. It is a bad year for crops. 18 was doing a little bit better, but 17 was a disaster. So a little bit about that. I was predicting this, and it didn't take me long. Unfortunately, I hate to say things like I'm predicting this or something like this, but I intuited this back in 2017 that as we move to 2 degrees Celsius, what we're going to see is glimpses and glimmers of what it's like to be permanently in a 2 degrees Celsius world. And so some years we're going to see huge crop delays, record crop failures, things like that. And then maybe the next year we see like, oh, things are going back to normal again. Or then the year after that, things are slightly okay. But then the year after that, they're absolutely catastrophic, disastrous. But then the year after that, they're decent. And then the year after that, they're really bad, but not catastrophic. Then they're kind of bad, but then they're really, really bad, and they're catastrophic kind of pattern scenario going on. So we're definitely going to be in a future of food shocks and food extremes for the foreseeable future. 3 states have still flooded and planted. I thought it was more than 3, so that's good news for me. I thought it was like 5 or 6 are still flooded. I'm sure more rains in the forecast, so that's not good for them, but absolutely. We've seen inland seas. I mean, this is absolutely incredible. We are living in biblical times. It's here. GMO seeds have contaminated. Well, I don't like the term GMO because it also becomes part of the kind of like cultural, like people who are semi-aware or semi kind of intelligent on these subjects kind of use these acronyms with not a lot of specificity. There are a range of different GMOs, and not all of them scare me. The type of GMOs that scare me, which are probably the ones that you're referencing, are the type of GMOs that Monsanto develops that are made to be Roundup Ready resistant. Okay, not all GMOs are made to be, Roundup Ready resistant. A lot of them are meant to be drought resistant or to handle higher levels of salt intake and things like that. But particularly the ones that are made specifically to make more money. So all the Roundup ones that kill people and stuff like that. And we're going to all find out that poison seeds are poisonous, and then the courts are going to be on our side, but it's going to be way, way, way too late, and half the population, if not the entire human population, is going to be infected by these seeds. But eventually we're going to find out, and somebody's going to want to sue. But yeah, those are definitely spreading across states, and they're also spreading across borders too. I mean, it's a big problem in Mexico. A lot of actually Mexican corn, they were talking about this is like 10 years ago, about how Monsanto seeds are getting across and spreading, and Monsanto's response was, we're going to live in a transgenic world. So that's Monsanto, the lunatics for you. What else we got in this discussion? I make my own pesticides. The good thing about hydroponics is we won't have to use pesticides. The bad thing about hydroponics is that they'll probably have less nutritional value than traditionally or classically grown plants. But the good thing is they won't have dangerous chemicals that are going to lead to leaky gut and a bunch of other horrific things for people like me if climate change doesn't take me out. I'm almost sure that if climate change doesn't take me out, the GMOs will. Yeah, I think that's true, Mike, that we are at 2 degrees Celsius now, and the massing aerosol effect is slowing the heat onset. I think that's very true. I think we are right around 2 degree, probably somewhere between 1.7 to 2.3 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial baseline 1750. If we take away the aerosol massing effect. That's going to present a huge challenge, because the idea here is that what's going to happen is that the population is going to wake up to realize that actually we don't want to be burnt off the surface of the planet. And so there's going to be a mad dash to start lowering our emissions with non-emitting energy sources. That's going to be interesting, because the second we do that, it's going to be a spontaneous hit. My hope is that we do it sooner than later, because of course the sooner we do it, the less of an impact it will have, but it's going to have a significant impact no matter what. But when it happens, people are going to be so scared that it's going to scare them to do more about climate change. Because of course the climate change is going to take over all industries. There aren't going to be, like, people aren't going to be manufacturing iPhones or Candy Crush apps. Like, I mean, maybe we'll still have iPhones, people doing that because telecommunications are still going to need stuff like that. But all of the luxuries that our technologies kind of bathed us in, that we don't need, that we really, really don't want to have, that we hate and throw away anyways, all that's going to stop because those things aren't going to be profitable. People are going to be too scared because it's going to be 120 degrees outside and raining, and their kids are going to go outside for 5 minutes and die. So people are gonna be sitting around on Facebook, So that's kind of the good thing about climate change, is it definitely is going to move people because it's going to be physically uncomfortable for a lot of people, physically uncomfortable. We're going to flatline at 3.2, which is within the margin of safety. I don't exactly know what that means. We're going to flatline at 3.2 degrees Celsius. I don't think there is a flat line. I don't think that temperature does this. I think temperature is likely going to continue to go up, probably on into the 22nd century. And if you look at the IPCC models, you see even the RPCCs. I mean, the date ends at 100, but at 2100. But if you look at those curves. Well, I know a lot of climatologists, buddy. I know a lot of climatologists. By the way, Donald Wobbles is foremost climatologist here in the United States, Illinois State University, and he's been dead wrong about this. So saying you're a climatologist, thanks for letting me know. But I think what's likely to happen is that the temperature is going to keep on rising 2200 and beyond. How late is it going to rise into 21st century? Well, that completely depends on the emission sources, right? So human industrial civilization, I don't think it's going to be emitting much longer than 2050, 2100. I don't think we're going to be emitting much longer than that period. So eventually, I think our emissions are going to tap out. But once our emissions tap out, I mean, we'll be way, way, way into the throes of runaway climate change and feedback. So I think with that happening, our emissions are likely, or not our emissions, but global emissions are likely to continue throughout the entirety of the 21st century, likely mostly unabated. So, NASA is looking at, their extreme models, they're talking about 800 to 1200 parts per million by 2100. That's so phenomenal. You have no idea. That's so phenomenal. The idea that the CO2 would be that high. We're already at catastrophic levels at 415. So the idea that we could hit 1,000 parts per million is so incredible to me. But there will be ameliorating effects, because as we warm up the planet, all of the ice is going to melt and dump straight into the oceans. That's going to have a huge cooling effect on the planet. It's going to be like that's also why I'm afraid of geoengineering, but it's going to have this whiplash effect, because we're going to be doing this instant warming, and then we're going to have this rapid deglaciation of Antarctica into the ocean, and that's going to rapidly cool down temperatures. And that will happen probably for, I would imagine, at the very least 50 years, maybe the most 150 years, that we'll have a short-term cooling, and then we'll have another warming period after that. But I don't think we're going to see anything like a temperature flat line at 2 degree, 3 degree, or 4 or 5. I think all those push us to hothouse at different rates. Obviously, if we get to 2 degrees by the middle of the century as opposed to 4, I think things are going to be a little bit better off for us. But essentially, I don't think the climate is going to pause unless there's some type of catastrophic negative feedback that's in the system. Let's see what else we got here. So again, I'm not understanding what we will flatline means. Does that mean civilization won't carry on? But we will flatline at 2 to 2.5 C. We cannot grow crops above 100 or 4 Fahrenheit. Once crops do not grow, we lose the carbon sink and oxygen, neutralize methane. Okay. So if you're saying that civilization is not going to go on, that the civilization is going to flatline, like I say, I fairly agree with you. Right around 2 degrees Celsius. That's why I was specifying human industrial emissions are going to end sometime in the century, because our civilization would have fallen apart But as far as planetary emissions from the permafrost and places like that, it's going to be emitting way into the 22nd century. So in that sense, I don't think temperatures are going to flatline, although human civilization is, of course, going to flatline, and probably early on. I'm not, fine. If people aren't going to be specific with me, I'm not going to say this anymore, but I don't know what the word flatline means here. And I'm not getting a lot of context for it. So you keep on saying flatline, but what does that mean? Who are you referring to? Any planting in Nebraska? Actually, I just looked it up. I think they're like at negative 30%. So they're not doing well at all. They are planting in Nebraska. Illinois was the worst. I think they're negative 86. But yeah, the heartland of the country is not doing good right now. I mean, I don't want to understate that at all. But yeah, the heartland of the country is not doing good right now. I think that we could very well see our first global climate change food shock in the next 6 to 12 months. I genuinely think it's possible. And I don't know how people are going to, I hope it does happen. I hope that people get so afraid, because my fear is that the inertia will happen. Let's say Bernie Sanders wins the presidency, that the inertia in the economic system and in our agriculture system, things like that, will fall apart during his presidency. And then, of course, because most Americans aren't very intelligent, they would just immediately say, well, Bernie Sanders is president, so he's the reason why the crops are failing. He's the reason why it's 120 degrees in Los Angeles. Something like that. So that's why I'm kind of hoping those things will happen under the Trump administration. Maybe that's why he should win another 4 years, so it can happen under his administration and people can blame him. Lori says it's 100 degrees is our high tomorrow. I'm so glad that's not us. We were baking for the last 12 days under 90 to almost 100 degree temperatures in North Carolina. So I'm glad it's not us. Flatline means staying in the margin before obtaining PETM, or the Paleocene, Eocene thermo maximum levels. Okay, well, that's a little bit better definition. I hope everybody can now understand why there's no way I could have understood. That's a very specific definition of flatline, which thank you for that. But of course, I couldn't have known that that's specifically what anyone was referencing. Guys, this is a great conversation, by the way. I got this other one. We'll keep just dumping SRM, geoengineering, toxic, heavy metals into our breathing, living atmosphere till breathing becomes impossible. The horizon sunset in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, June 7, 2019, is white with solar radiation management. Why is there no talk about the reality of this poisoning us? I don't know too much about the biochemical response to geoengineering. I do know that, my friend who works for IPCC, in 2017, I'll say this, we were, because I'm a smart guy and he's a smart guy, so smart guys know what's going to happen in the future. So we were talking about this, and I said, well, they're going to geoengineer. The rich people are going to geoengineer. He says, yeah, they're going to, we're already talking about it. And, he kind of said, and I thought he was joking, but he said, they're going to put mirrors in space. I said, that's the Futurama cartoon show. They're not going to put mirrors in space. He says, no, it's under serious consideration. They're going to put mirrors in space. It's okay. He says, well, the other option is other forms of SRM that involve chemical release. And there's a lot of controversy around that. And this guy, a very sober individual, was talking about this, and they're serious. We're going to start massive geoengineering of the Earth's atmospheric chemistry to reflect sunlight. That is going to have effects on. I don't think there's. I almost think there's no need to do that, though, because any type of immediate temperature reduction is going to be a climatological whiplash. So imagine driving your car 100 miles an hour into a wall. And then after you do that, somehow your car is still able to reverse at 100 miles an hour into the wall behind you. That's not really, that's not, I wouldn't say that equals it out. I feel like that's just as bad. So I think that may happen where we just give the planet, the entire biosphere, and we would, because everything right now, as far as we're aware, the critters, as I like to call them because I'm not a biologist, but the critters are in a mad dash for the poles right now. Animals are swimming deeper and further away. They're climbing higher on the mountaintops. I mean, they're literally being burnt off. Like I said, we're being burnt off the surface. The only people who don't realize that are the humans. You know, so that's what's going to happen. And then we're going to geoengineer, and then the animals are going to get whiplashed. They've now climbed too high. They dive too deep, and they've moved too far north, and then they're going to get whiplashed by the geoengineering. So the only people who think they're going to be okay with this are the humans. And what Matt Nelson is saying is probably right. There are going to be unintended consequences to the humans for geoengineering. And they're probably not going to be good unintentional consequences, because that's just how these things don't ever work. So we have few options on the table, but we do have options on the table. I do want to leave it here, ladies and gentlemen, because like I said, I didn't want this to be too negative, or not too negative. I didn't want it to be too saddening. It is extremely negative. In fact, it's extremely saddening, I think. But hopefully here I was trying to give people a punch to do the right thing no matter what. And do it at large scale. Don't just do it privately, okay? The last thing we need is a bunch of private people doing private, commercialized, marketized decisions that don't have any effect on anybody except for themselves. And it's like, you know, to me, we're in this relationship with the Lord, our planet, and we want to make amends even though things are going out the window. We want to do the right thing even though things are going in the wrong direction. We want to do right things for as long as that we're here. And there's never a bad time to do or say the right thing. There's never a bad time to do that, even if you're on your deathbed, right? So in the next 10 years or the next 5 years, or maybe tomorrow, you know, if you're starving to death, you don't have to slaughter your neighbor's child and eat their heart as a last attempt to survive for 2 days longer. You can just die then. That would be the right thing to do in that situation. You don't have to eat some kid's heart. So point being here is there's never a bad time to do the right thing. In fact, right now is the best time to do the right thing. All right. And I do want to get this in from Nicholas Humphrey, because I see he's in the chat. Geoengineering is completely impractical. We have no idea how many impacts would ultimately evolve. And that's essentially what I was hinting around at, that you know, if we do geoengineer, those unintended consequences, right, would probably be more negative than positive. Because species are not, I don't think, meant to do things like that. You know, no other species, I mean, it's not entirely true, because, you know, I was learning in the History Channel or whatever, and they were talking about Earth's development, where, you know, this microbe that basically was emitting oxygen into the atmosphere changed the atmospheric chemistry of the planet and caused a mass extinction, because nothing at the time had evolved to breathe oxygen. And so the fact that the air was being poisoned with oxygen was lethal. So species do have the ability to change the atmospheric chemistry of the planet. But in doing so, opening this Pandora's box is extremely dangerous. No cannibalism allowed. That's actually a private pledge I've taken to myself. And I would suggest that everybody, before the food hits the fan, everybody to probably, if there's one private thing that you should do, is that's pledge to not be a cannibal. If you don't want to eat meat, don't do that privately. If you want to drive an electric car, don't do that privately. If you stop beating your wife, let people know. But please, at least privately, don't eat people. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to wrap it up here at the point that we're talking about cannibalism. But thank you for joining us. Thank you for having this serious conversation. And I really do hope that these talks have helped arm people with the knowledge, or at least with the spirit, to actually go out in their communities and affect change. Because we may not get the change that we hope for, but we might end up getting a change that's more pleasant than doing nothing. And I think ultimately that's worth fighting for. it is worth fighting for to make sure that maybe a small part of the species does survive this, with quality in life. You know, I don't want, you know, our last ditch effort to have been to recreate the road, because then that's not really where we want to evolve from. But I want us to create a last moment of decency for ourselves. Let that be our lasting legacy. Is that after the abrupt roar of industrial civilization, it ends with a peaceful and soothing silence. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on the Rising Tide Environmental Coffee.